Hi, I'm Carys.
And I'm Gary Young. And this is Over the Top and Under the Radar.
Every week, Gary and I will be talking about the stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough.
This week's episode is a post-election special. Hey, Carys.
Hey, Gary.
You're up.
I'm up. I'm not going to
man.
say against my will, but I am going to let the listeners know that there was a production decision made about when we would start recording this election special, and it was a little bit earlier than I wanted.
I seem to remember the conversation going that me and Sarah, the producer, were like, well, we could do 8. Well, I could do 7:30. Well, I could do 7. And I was like, wait. Let's wait until Carys comes. And then Carys is like, how about 11? Or after lunch?
I suggest 11. But when I saw the phrase, the earlier the better for me. Yeah, me too. And those listening who are not morning people, hello, my kinsman. The earlier the better is not a phrase that I ever want to hear. Well, how was the rest of your night? So we had our virtual over-under election party.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed.
It was so fun. Over-under listeners are great. We knew this to be true. But yeah, the WhatsApp group is very well informed, lots of good analysis, a lot of debate over, the main things for those of you who weren't in the WhatsApp group, main things you missed were debate over what channel to watch and what snacks to eat. They were the hottest topics other than politics.
They were the hottest topics. When I introduced the snack issue, which was
contentious,
about 11:15. Yeah, and I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. People might be like, this is a serious thing. You're talking about snacks. I said, can we just talk about snacks for a minute? And people were on it like a bonnet. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it. And there were some interesting snacks.
Well, tell us what you were snacking on and what else came out of the group.
Well, I see, dear listener, I have a bit of a heart condition. Not a bit of a heart condition, because you only get one heart, so I have a heart condition. So my snacks were cashews and grapes.
Cashews, great nut decision. Much better than peanuts. Come at me. Cashews are a money nut.
Yeah, I used to be an almond guy, but
a little dry.
That's what I'm feeling now. And I saw, Carys, you didn't have a snack. You had a Scooby snack. That was huge.
Well, and not a Scooby snack. That suggests I was consuming marijuana. No. I had a traditional
Scooby snack from Scooby Doo.
Oh, like a lot of food. I'd say I had a very traditional night of pizza and beer in a brewery in the Walthamstow area that had said if the exit poll was good for Labour, they would serve alcohol at 97 prices. So yeah, it was a very fun night. It was like slight football match atmosphere when the exit poll came in, booing when Jacob Rees-Mogg was on screen. But yeah, I'd say I have a husky voice as a result today. And yeah, I just went straight for pizza, Gary. You can't go wrong with pizza.
But that pizza was like the size of the Isle of Man. I mean, it was not a small pizza.
I don't mess about with hunger, Gary.
No, I know that. I've been with you when you've gotten hangry, and it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. But the picture that you showed was really of a pizza box with pizza debris. It was the end of your snack, really.
There was one slice left that was my friend's by rights, so I couldn't eat it. That's the only reason there was even a slice. He'd gone to get a drink, and I was like, oh, "Fuck, this one's his." No, but no regrets on the pizza. It was delicious. What a night! But wait, what were the good snacks? Someone baked a very good cake in the WhatsApp group. But I'm trying to.
That was my friend Jan. My friend Jan baked a cake. It said, fuck the Tories. That's good. There was my brother, who was also involved in the over-under, who had, it seemed like Tory snacks or Lib Dem snack. It was cheese and red wine. And then there was a conversation about, well, what kind of cheese? Someone was like, yeah, you're going to need to get some Stilton in there. It was a kind of Garrick Club. Not Garrick Club, that's a sexist one. Like a Soho.
I mean, Pat, if you're listening, he's coming for you. I think this is disrespectful.
It was a snack of the bourgeoisie, is what it was. It was a ruling class snack. And I salute that. Socialist politics, ruling class snacks.
We want the bourgeois snacks for everyone. That's what we want. Exactly. That's socialism. We want everyone to eat the delicious cheese. We want you to eat your most delicious, best cheese, you know.
Yes. Under socialism, everyone will have tasty cheese. Then there was one of the participants who had some bubbly. There were a lot of crisps. The election was the vehicle for the snacks.
But do you have any, we've got our overs and our unders, but do you have any general election reflections?
The main one is, and these things kind of interestingly have to come in order at a certain point. You have to start with the Tories crashing out. To see so many Tories eating shit was beautiful. That was
delicious.
Thing.
Delicious.
Yeah. To see them all look so kind of crestfallen, that was delightful. Although there was a vibe, I've got to say, which I found, because of my politics, I found a bit sinister, of like, now that Britain is safe for democracy, now that Corbyn has gone and Labour is tamed and so on, they kept talking about, and this is important if we think of Trump and even the way Boris Johnson went, you know, the orderly transition. That's what's great about this country. It's moved from one party to another and an easy transition. All of that is true, although I don't think they'd have been saying that if there was a different leader in the Labour Party, like Corbyn. I feel like that's been the project of the last 9 years, is like make the electoral system safe for the political class.
I think my reflection was that it was quite, and we've talked about this before, like the coverage was not the same. Anyone who saw Nadine Dorries and Alistair Campbell, or just Nadine Dorries on Channel 4, knows that every channel was not showing the same thing. But I think overall it still felt quite samey. That sense of like, there are stories that the media want to talk about, and then there's a set of things that they're less interested in, was one of the things that I felt flicking between the different channel coverage. So we've got a new government, lots of change, and thanks to a small but growing number of Patreon supporters, we are getting to a position where the podcast can continue. So if you enjoy listening to Over the Top and Under the Radar, please go to the Patreon website, search for the podcast and support us today.
Yeah, it's a new government and it has to be held to account. For that, we need independent media. And we are that. We are produced by a small black indie. We are here to talk about some things that other people aren't talking about in a way that they're not talking about them. So really support us on Patreon. Go to Patreon, and for, depending on where you live, for the price of a cup of coffee in Hackney, maybe just the oat milk, you can support us doing exactly that. We need your help. And as last night proved with our WhatsApp community, you're buying into a more extensive conversation.
And we have a new package on Patreon, the Prosecco Socialist package, in the tradition, the socialist tradition of from each according to their ability to each according to their need. If you can afford to be a Prosecco Socialist and pay a little bit more every month to cover the cost of the podcast, we would really appreciate it. I think my over the top is just a word, which is change. I'm over the word change, and I'm specifically over the lack of interrogation of what Labour have meant when they've said change. Like, this is a change election. A lot has changed. Parliament has changed. The electoral map has been transformed. But I feel like when Keir Starmer and Labour talk about change, they're really only talking about changing the Labour Party. I mean, we could get into how I think Labour did in this election and how I don't think they had great key messages or talking points. But the only one that kept coming through was about how Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. There was a particularly hilarious clip where Wes Streeting tried to give a very extended boat metaphor about steering the ship and the sails.
There were jellyfish.
And then the wind was billowing. And it was just like, what the fuck are we talking about when we talk about change? Because I think most people in the country wanted a change of government. I think they want a change of how things are run. And I think we've got a Labour Party who are just talking about sticking it to a few lefties and changing who gets selected as a PPC to make sure they're all just boringly loyal to Keir Starmer. I'm kind of over just the word change or the concept of change, because we've seen it in this country and in others in these really volatile times where if you're just talking about change, you're not getting to the heart of what the problems are. My over the top is change. I don't want to just hear that word. What do you reckon?
Yeah. Well, what's clear is it's a change of government. But what does that mean if there's not a change of direction? What does it mean if there's not a change? And we have yet to see what that change will be. I'm glad that there has been a change of government because the last government is awful. This government at least, or this party at least, claims that they will not do as many things that were completely wrong, maybe. But also, even electorally, it seems Labour got 2% more of the vote share than they did in 2019. Now, that is not nothing, but to say like he's transformed the party, and they keep talking about like how root and branch and he's made the party electable, and there is some truth to that in terms of the technology of our elections, but it's 2% more than they got last time. It's actually less votes than they got last time in 2019 because the turnout was down. So then what do we mean when we talk about change there? And I think what we mean is that they have become more skilled, and this is not nothing, actually it's quite important, at directing their votes. But once again, in the words of Gil Scott-Heron, the first thing I want to say is mandate my ass. That is not a popular mandate. And I think that's a problem. So the way that they talked about that change that you identify, first of all, didn't mean necessarily a change in people's lives. They weren't saying that. But secondly, even electorally, politically, it was a huge change, what he's done. But electorally, it actually, in sheer numbers, did not deliver anything like what is being claimed. And the Tories lost, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I think I was going to say there is some change that I feel really fucking good about. And the first thing is we kick the Tories out. That is a change. And it will be a change to have Labour in power. There will be no flights taking off to Rwanda.
Are you sure about that?
Well, they were pretty clear on that. That was one of the few things they explicitly committed to doing, which is not flying planes to Rwanda.
Where are they going to fly?
So that
Tuscany.
Well, no, I mean, they have said they will get immigration down. They have said that they will process people faster and that'll be tough. But this absolutely bananas policy cooked up by a right-wing rump of the Tory party will no longer happen. I believe there will be a deal with the junior doctors on pay. I think we'll get more houses built, probably not enough, definitely not enough social. It will be better to have a Labour government, and it is a change. And I don't want to deny that change. And I don't want to be raining on the parade of everyone waking up this morning being like, after 14 years of a bunch of incompetent people who cut our public sector to the bone, it will be better to have Labour. But I think the thing that stays with me, having been on a few of these general election roundabouts in the last decade or so, is I remember in December 2019 when we were told that the size of Boris's landslide put Labour out of action for a generation. So actually, really what's happening, like we get told these changes, these swings are so big and this is a game changer and the Tories are annihilated. But actually, if we look at recent British political history, change is the one constant. People wanting a change, like the volatility of the electorate feels quite baked in. So then actually what change does matter, because otherwise you've got people who vote for the change of Brexit and then they vote to get out of the Tories, or 1 minute they vote for Boris Johnson, but they don't vote for Theresa May. So like the thing we know is true, that things will change. Things are volatile and febrile. And so I think it then makes what we mean by change pretty important, because the 4 Green MPs that got elected and the 4 Reform MPs that got elected are both big change mandates, but for very different kinds of change. And I guess that's what I'm interested in now. Like, where is it we want the country to go towards?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on commentators not just to announce the change that we can see. I'm not partying for Starmer. I'm partying on the graves of the reputations and careers of those Tories. That's my party. It's a party to which we should all bring decent snacks.
I'll be drinking the tears of Liz Truss.
But to accurately describe the change would be helpful. Their vote in England remained the same. Their vote in Wales went down. It was Scotland that delivered this victory for them. I don't think that diminishes the victory. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, it's part of the electoral process, but it's worth making the point.
I'm glad you brought up Scotland, because I think, again, it's like that change was also arguably away from the SNP. What if you took Labour out of the equation and people were just voting on the people who were in power? And way back when, in 2019, I was involved in a Labour leadership campaign for my former boss, Lisa Nandy. And it was a campaign that she lost and Keir Starmer won. But I remember going to a party and there were a lot of Labour people there, because Labour people like to party together. And I remember talking to a new Labour former special advisor. We knew each other to say hi, and I said, how are you doing? And I said what everyone said at that point of who you supporting in the leadership election. And he said, no offense, but I'm supporting Keir Starmer. I said, okay, why? And he said, at some point, the music stops on this lot. And all we need is for the electorate to look over at Labour and say, he'll do. And it stayed with me. And I think it was really prescient, like that as a strategy, Keir as a candidate, and then the approach that the Labour Party have taken is very much best of a bad bunch. And that idea of like the music was going to stop on the Tories, the music was going to stop on the SNP. Very few parties can like successfully democratically hold on to power forever. And so then like the other people just have to be all right. They don't have to be great. But I think we have to be real about what that means then for the incoming government. Easy for me to say they're staring down the barrel of a historic and huge landslide. But I think they need to be a bit mindful of hubris.
That's a good omen. And it kind of dovetails in a way with my omen, which is about the way they talk about legitimacy. Because I've heard them kind of say, you know, it's a mandate and he's got to deliver and all of that. If you take this big majority that he has, but then you look at the low turnout, and it's not historically low, like it's never ever been lower, but it's in between 2001, 2005. It's really not good. And it confirms that trajectory. And then you look at their vote share, then they have a big majority with really thin support. And, you know, it's telling when they say, well, look how big the majority was in 2019 and they've overturned it. And it's like, yeah, so let's not think that couldn't happen again. It would just be great if the media class could approach these moments in terms of like, well, really, what can they do? And they have a bit, to be fair, on the BBC. There have been some questions, but they're not really going for it in a way that I think that they should. And they're not really emphasizing the absurdity that you could get such a big majority with relatively few votes. In terms of the eligible vote, by which I mean the share of the vote, but taking into account the turnout, I think there were about 5 seats still to be called when we started this. But Starmer's looking at about 21% of the eligible vote. Now, in 1951, Winston Churchill lost with 38% of the eligible vote. So this is 1 in 5 people voted for Labour, but they can more or less do what they want. And we don't know what that is because they kind of really wouldn't tell us.
You don't need to know that, Gary. Don't worry your pretty little head about that.
I know. Adults are talking, young man.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, the turnout points. And my understanding is turnout was at a sort of 20-year historic low. So we're looking at, you know, places compared to 2019, like turnout down 10%. I think Keir Starmer's constituency, you know, it was like 50% turnout or 52% turnout. Are we really saying that Keir Starmer is going to restore trust in politics, so that the people who stayed at home in 2024 when they had the chance to kick out the Tories are suddenly going to be excited and energized in 5 years' time? And they'll be like, I trust politicians now because of Keir Starmer's Labour Party. So now I'm going to turn out. That, I feel like, does not pass the sniff test. And then you've got the issue of incentives, because when most people or a big chunk of people don't turn out, then suddenly the very enthused minority of people who are going to turn out, like reform voters, take up even more political space. I'm going to guess a lot more attention is going to go to the thousands of people in each seat that were voting reform this time than the people that stayed at home.
My under the radar is the splintering on both sides. On the one side, there was an organised splintering from the company, not the party, Reform. They're so determined to call it that, but, he kept saying we're a startup. It's like, dude.
I love the idea of Nigel Farage borrowing like Silicon Valley tech bro language.
Do you reckon in Reform's headquarters they've got like a table tennis table and free?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Dartboard with immigrants' faces on it. And then, they've got the video games, they've got the table tennis. I reckon everyone's just going around in hoodies,
So on the one hand, we have, and I got quite a lot of pushback a few weeks ago when I said on a podcast, they treat him like a garrulous uncle at pie, but he comes through the tradition of fascism. You're not fascist. You should look that up. But now we've seen what people who stand for reform, we've seen what they say about shooting immigrants and the racial slurs that they use. And these were only the ones that we caught.
For those who don't know, Channel 4 did an investigation into reform activists in Clacton, which all complaints Reform brought about the investigation were dismissed by the Electoral Commission. And this wasn't even a guy that went under deep cover in Clacton. He basically just rocked up at Farage's headquarters in Clacton with his camera phone. And within, it seemed like a couple of hours, he had all manner of activists saying all manner of racist, homophobic nonsense with very little prompting, it seemed. It wasn't like a 6-month, we've embedded someone and uncovered this. You're not even really scratching the surface, are you? You're sort of just like blowing the dust off it.
It was like he went out with some birdseed and said, let's see what birds can, and they all can. They weren't discerning people.
Birds.
It was an investigation, but there weren't a lot of sleuthing going on because it wasn't necessary. That's not criticism. Basically, we've now got committed racists in Parliament under that banner. And somebody, was my brother actually, in the WhatsApp group last night was saying, well, what's the difference? Which I think is a good question, even if he is my brother. What is the difference between Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, all these people who were reform kind of light, and this is a real thing? And I think the difference is that they were somewhat reined in by being within the Tory party, that it could have been worse. And these 4 people to have broken through in a first past the post system, to have 4 seats, from finally to have a seat, is actually kind of quite chilling on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have the challenges from the left, which were quite mixed. There were some victories, but it was bitty. I did think throughout this campaign, my main worry was reform. It was more of a worry than Starmer. I'm not convinced that the left, in the broadest sense, though you can talk about the left, that the left didn't see Starmer's heresy as being worse than anything that was going on in the far right.
Yeah. So what's the difference between Suella Braverman and Nigel Farage? I think that question is a pertinent one. And I think that we do have a very proud tradition of anti-racist activism in the UK, organisations like Hope Not Hate, Searchlight, and we saw that when the BNP were making inroads in Barking and Dagenham back in 2010. I don't think we've badged reform as far right. I think you're right. I think it's not just the media. I think maybe it's also the left. And it's hard to understand why that is. And I think Hope Not Hate, to be fair, to credit them, I think they are treating reform like that. But yeah, it doesn't get reported in the way that Le Pen's victories have been reported. And I think, yeah, we're storing up problems for ourselves.
I do think that the left think of Farage as far right. I do. But I don't think, to your point, while they do think of him as far right, they didn't approach him as I think they would have approached Marine Le Pen. It's hard to do that when you're besieged, right? It's hard to look the world clear in the eye when someone's got their foot on your neck. And so I do get why the left's been in that position, which is a kind of defensive crouch, when they actually represent quite a lot. Those challenges where they were made, many of them actually kind of did make an impact. But they were challenges to the right-wing drift in Labour, which I think is important. But I don't know that they tied it in with the right-wing drift of reform as well. And I think we have to do both.
I think some of that comes from a squeamishness about the Brexit vote and the sheer number of people that voted Brexit and not wanting to badge them all far right, which I think is right. But then we get in the situation where, and I'm hoping someone's going to crunch the numbers, we're too fresh with what, as you say, 5 seats left to declare. But in 2019, Farage's last incarnation of a political party, the Brexit Party, did a deal with Boris Johnson's Conservatives and stood down in Conservative seats. So that we also need to sort of pass what happened there, because obviously the 2 seats in the Northeast that announced their results first, thanks to armies of sixth formers running the ballots around, get so much scrutiny because, you know, from like 11 o'clock till like midnight, there's no one else to talk about. If you look at a lot of those early Labour seats where lots of us felt sick to our stomachs because there was a big reform vote, sometimes it's just kind of the Brexit party vote plus some Tory vote. And so I think we do need to understand what happened to the reform vote, how much of it is reconstituted Brexit party. And yeah, and I think we have to be really clear-eyed and not afraid to talk about it as a far right party and to use the tools in our toolkit that we used to take those things on. But I think there has been a squeamishness, and now, yeah, it worries me. It worries me for the next few years and for the next election.
Elections are moments in time, and they are consequential moments in time. While they are part of politics, they shouldn't be confused or understood as being only politics. Boris Johnson won a huge majority. Marcus Rashford made him reverse some of the stuff he was doing within about 9 months. So elections are consequential. They do matter. But the day after election, the weeks after, that also matters. What was great about the election was who lost. As for who won, we have yet to see what they will do. And ultimately, and here I quote Frederick Douglass, the kind of great abolitionist, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. They will do what we make them do.
And I think that's a really nice segue to my under the radar, this idea of this election being a snapshot of a moment in time. I don't know, I woke up and I went through the results this morning. We did this show a bit differently because we wanted to actually respond to the election results. But my under the radar, and I'm kind of happy to be able to talk about in this context, is Gaza. Gaza wasn't on the ballot this election, and in my opinion, it wasn't talked about enough. You know, I sat through multiple leaders' debates where there were protesters outside protesting what is going on in Gaza. And you had BBC journalists saying sorry for the noise and not a single question from the studio audience. So it was an issue that people cared about. And for me, as someone who was politicized during the Iraq War, whose journey into activism and politics was about an international issue or a non-domestic issue, there was something quite powerful about seeing that even without the attention and the oxygen that someone like a Farage got, Gaza was on the ballot, and in a number of seats, it made a difference. Jonathan Ashworth, a front bench Labour politician, lost his seat in Leicester South. Independents won in Blackburn, Tewkesbury and Batley. And if you cast a bit of a wider net than where independents won, or the charming language we get where there are high Muslim populations, Jeremy Corbyn is a pro-Gaza candidate. Faiza Shaheen, who didn't win in Chingford and with Green, but got pretty much the same number of votes as the Labour candidate, they both got around 12,000 votes at the last count, is also a pro-Gaza candidate, a candidate who has politics on Gaza. Rushnara Ali got run really close in Bethnal Green and Bow. And I think the reason I want us to talk about it is because it is a moment in time. It's a response to the politics of Israel and Palestine right now. And also it goes against the received wisdom that many of us were told for years, which is you can't talk about non-domestic issues at an election. It doesn't matter. No one cares. Well, people care, and they turned out. And Wes Streeting was 550 votes shy from not being an MP. This is the touted future Labour leader. This is the person who, other than Keir Starmer, gets put on our TV screens every day. And an independent campaign ran him very, very close. And I think Gaza has gone under the radar for too long. And I hope, hopefully not in vain, that there will be some consequences to it. For me, it's huge. It's huge, the impact it had.
Yes, I agree. And it speaks to the dislocation between the political class and the rest of the population, that the rest of the population have wanted one thing. And when Labour says we've listened to people. Well, they didn't bloody listen to people about that. And they seem determined not to. There's something wrong with an electoral culture that decides that there's nothing to see there. And the way that these candidates intruded into this kind of, no, there's nothing to see. We are having our own kind of conversation. And then you can vote on what you think of what we've just said. The way that those candidates intruded on that was really heartening and shows potential, because with probably a little bit more resources and a little bit of education, we would kind of be having a different conversation. I think if Jess Phillips and Wes Streeting had gone, which was pretty close, both of them, we would be having a different conversation. But even with the people who were ousted, we can have a different conversation.
And I think the reason I think people should take heart is there's a lot of things that we are told about the country, about elections. And one of them, and I guess it sticks with me because I've been told it since I was a teenager who was angry about the Iraq War. I remember being patronizingly told by pretty much always older white men that like this wasn't something that working class people cared about. This wasn't something that like normal people cared about, the implication being that I wasn't normal. And maybe that's true, but I was a working class teenager with an Iraqi friend. Like it's like a narrow reading of who's in the country, who matters. And it's wrong because this is against the tide of an electoral system which squeezes all but the two big parties out because we have first past the post. So it's a mountain to climb to get not just on the ballot paper, but elected. And so in a context where there isn't a huge amount of mainstream media coverage, there isn't a lot much clear blue water between the two big political parties, people organized and they put Gaza on the ballot and they said, no, we care about this. That is also one of the takeaways similar to you of this election of like, don't believe what they tell you about politics. The only thing we know about politics in the UK is everything's changing. Don't bow to a big Labour majority, meaning you need to shut up and not talk about certain things. And yeah, I think for me, that's like a grain of hope. I am very hopeful about a Labour government, even this one. But I'm also hopeful about how people organise.
I'm not hopeful about this Labour government. I'm always hopeful about people. It's like a curse for me. I'm terminally optimistic.
The progressive curse.
I am hopeful about what we might be able to do about a Labour government. But once again, when we talk about change, there's been a change in who among ethnic minorities about who will vote for Labour. Labour's vote went down in London. Labour's vote is collapsing again amongst Pakistanis and Bangladeshis. There's no saying that those votes are going to come back.
I guess the thing I'd like to talk to you about, Gary, is I nearly did first past the post as one of my overs or unders. But I think the thing that's sticking in my head is it was inspiring and impressive to see how the people who organised around Gaza had an electoral impact, a meaningful one. We ain't going to get a change to first past the post. The people who have the keys to the United Kingdom are very happy with first past the post. Thank you very much. They've got a massive majority. It, I don't know, probably mitigates the number of reform seats that we get, but it also means that for the Greens, for all of those activists who were organising around Gaza, it's so much harder to get heard politically. Yeah, wondered if you got any thoughts on that. Are you a PR fan?
I favour a version of PR because there are lots of versions. This system doesn't work for me. A friend of ours actually was saying, what do we do? Like, do we vote Dan Abbott? Do we vote Green? And I was kind of saying, well, to be honest, none of it's going to influence the outcome. Dan Abbott's going to win. So you can vote your conscience. And I said I'd vote for Dan Abbott, but like Green would be a reasonable thing to do. You can't have a system where 80, 90% of the people, their vote is not essentially going to change the outcome. And one might look at this election and say, well, it's many more people than that, isn't it? Because lots of seats changed hands and we are living in a world where very few seats are safe. But the thing is that a lot of those seats changed hands because people voted for someone that they didn't really like, but who could beat someone that they liked even less. And that's just no way to do business.
most people that vote are pretty across tactical voting. And that is the sort of, these weird workarounds you get into when something's broken. Like my mum's tap was broken and she stuck a like honey stirrer into it so that she could still make the tap work. So people in the UK have got really good at like gaming the system we have with just huge amounts of tactical voting. And that isn't the same as the system working. It's like, people in Surrey are like, okay, Jeremy Hunt's getting close run, so I can vote Lib Dem. But yeah, it does mean a system where most people aren't getting to vote for who they want to vote for. It's so annoying and frustrating because the only chance we had to change the voting system, I would say, was screwed up by the Lib Dems. Sad thing about this huge Labour majority is PR is not going to be on the agenda. It's not even under the radar. It's not on anyone's radar, I don't think. I think a system that sort of is based on like the worst sort of postcode lottery isn't one that can deliver results. And ultimately, as terrifying as I find it, just like squeezing reform out with first past the post doesn't solve the problems that reform poses.
Yeah. I mean, to give an example, so I, dear listener, have been lying to you since the beginning of the podcast because the last previous two elections before this one, I was in Diane Abbott's constituency, and I assumed I was in Diane Abbott's constituency until I opened my polling card. And where I live, my street is like Alsace-Lorraine in France, keeps swapping between France and Germany, or Schleswig-Holstein, which goes between Denmark and Germany.
You're in a different constituency.
Yeah, man. And so I didn't get to vote for Diane. I didn't vote Labour. I voted Green. And so because of first past the post, I actually changed my vote. I looked at it and thought, oh, well.
No, Diane, no vote.
I wasn't going to vote for a non-left candidate anyway. And this candidate was not a left candidate. And at the same time, not a prolific post checker. And at the same time that I opened my thing with my polling card on it, I also had a leaflet from her with a bloody Union Jack on it. And I thought, don't do that. Don't put that in my letterbox. Not that there was any chance I was going to vote for a mainstream Labour candidate anyway, but all I needed was that leaflet to think, no, just, sort of. Yeah, the first past the post system, on the morning of the election, it changed my vote. I was in a different constituency, but I am the same person.
So I
went from sort of slightly, not grudgingly voting for Diane because I in some way didn't want to vote for her, but because I didn't want to vote Labour. And I had a whole thing in my head, like, I'm voting for Diane, I'm not voting Labour. And as opposed to the vote that I did make, where I could kind of skip to the polls, be like, I don't have to explain shit to nobody.
There's actually something quite beautiful about that, just given it has been quite a big arc of the podcast, that you were like, you psyched yourself up, like, I can do it, man. You got Keir Starmer on one side, you got Diane Abbott on the other, and you're like wrestling with all of this. And then you get to the point where you're like, oh, it's not on the ballot. Easy. It's all coming up, Gary.
Yeah.
Before we say goodbye to 14 years of Tories, I guess, is there anything, I don't know, I've been reading all the think pieces and, I was, in the pub yesterday, like, it's been a ride. I mean, shit show is one phrase we might use, but is there anything that's staying with you or that you're kind of thinking about?
If I had a high and a low, the low would be the Windrush scandal because of the degree to which it was so unsettling. I did a lot of work on myself to be able to describe myself as British, and there was a lot of political work done to make that space, which I did not grow up calling myself British. Didn't feel like there was space for that. The Windrush scandal kind of knocked it right back in terms of like, it's still really contingent. Much as, kind of learning to support England at football and kind of all of that. And then the high, and it was a bad thing, but it was the Liz Truss immolation, self-immolation really. And at the beginning I'm thinking, shit, is that going to work? Is that, maybe they'll get away with it. Like, it's mental, but maybe they're going to get away with it. And then just seeing it disintegrate so royally, that was awesome. There was one other thing actually, which was when Boris Johnson wouldn't come out of the house and everybody was resigning. People I'd never heard of were resigning. That couple of days, it was like,
oh, the Chris
there's
Pincher
a minister
scandal
for that.
Oh,
that was awesome. But
beautiful.
The point at which he fired Michael Gove, that's what I thought was funny. He was like in the bunker And then, I'm trying to think of bunker analogies and I'm failing, but like he wasn't doing well in the bunker. And then he like pokes his head up out of the cigar and you can shut your face and then goes back in again. It was so crazy that he fired Michael Gove in the middle of that. And then maybe not even in the middle, towards the end. And then maybe like, I don't know, 3 hours later, he resigned, but he was like in Viz. There used to be a character called Big Vern. And Big Vern in Viz, he thought he was a gangster, but he wasn't a gangster. So it'd just be out shopping. And Big Vern's thing was like, no bastard's taking me alive. And then he would shoot himself in the head. And that's what Boris Johnson, like firing Michael Gove in the middle of like this collapse.
You get it too. I know, but also like that. That was a day when I was grateful for 24-hour news and Twitter, because I was just like, the popcorn was out. And like, I think it was Nadeem Zahawi who got appointed as Chancellor and then was like, I'm resigning, man. I can't. And I was like, you literally just took a job to, that was a glorious, and it just was
feckless.
It was the exit he deserved. Classless, messy as fuck. Yeah. And even his exit speech was also graceless. Like something that was like the mob moves. It was just, it's exactly what he deserved. Just as
it was the herd.
Oh yes, the
herd move.
Dominus Victus. And off he went. And honestly,
Dominus Victus.
I don't know. Sorry to my secondary school Latin teacher. I did do a bit of Latin. Clearly it didn't stick. But I also think the perfect ending to Liz Truss's story was last night when she sat smiling that horrific smile on the stage and she got booted out. Weirdly, so much of the legacy that we now have to deal with is about that first Cameron government and the cuts and the sort of...
And the Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, Brexit was a big thing. For me, the cuts, like the scale of the cuts and like the destruction of the public sector is, if you're not paying attention to like history and context, then you can talk about crime rates being high and it's like, well, at the start of this horrific Tory government, when it was still a coalition, but like it was a Tory-led coalition, loads of the good work of New Labour was undone with like a swipe of George Osborne's pen. Local governments are still skint. NHS is on its knees. Loads of stuff doesn't work. And, the welfare state just became like an embarrassment rather than something we should be proud of. It's like, it should be as small as possible. And how dare anyone get support from the state? And that is Labour's inheritance. And because they haven't really challenged the economic consensus. In fact, I remember cringing hearing some Labour statement saying that the Tories had maxed out the nation's credit card. Like, sidebar, countries do not function like humans with credit cards. So yeah, I think my like fear, Windrush was a low for me, but like my low is just worrying that hasn't been challenged, isn't going to be challenged, and has to be challenged if we actually want the country to be better. And yeah, my high was honestly watching Boris Johnson leave. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Thank you for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com. And we also now have a Patreon. So if you want to support the show, find us by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon.
And you can connect with us in between podcast episodes on social media. Our handle is @over_under_pod_.